Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome today to the Wallace Collection Online, and welcome to today's talk, Lady Wallace, the French woman who gifted the Wallace Collection to the British nation. This is the first talk in our short series for International Women's Day, and I will be handing over to today's speaker, Suzanne Higgett, in just a few moments' time. But just before we get started, a few bits of housekeeping. Firstly, to say if you're joining us via Zoom and you wish to ask any questions, please get those in via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And if you're watching along on YouTube, if you have any questions, again, get those in via the chat function, and we'll be putting aside a little time at the end of today to get back to you on those. Also to say that this talk is BSL interpreter supported. So if you're watching along on Zoom and you would like to expand the screen of either our speaker Suzanne Higgett or our BSL live interpreter, please just select the grey bar in between the presentation screen and the screen of our speakers, and you'll be able to expand and change the size of those screens to your preferred size. So with all that out of the way, please allow me to introduce curator at the Wallace Collection and, of course, author of The Most Fortunate Man of His Day, Richard Wallace, connoisseur, collector and philanthropist, Suzanne Higgett.
Thanks very much, Ollie, for that nice introduction. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this talk about Lady Wallace to mark International Women's Day. A few words about the images that you're going to see. All the images that don't have accompanying ownership information belong to the Wallace Collection. Lady Wallace has earned her place in history as the benefactress who, on her death in 1897, bequeathed the Wallace Collection to the British nation. It comprises the works of art that were on the ground and first floors of her London residence, Hertford House. The collection was formed by the first to fourth Marquises of Hertford and the likely illegitimate son of the fourth Marquis, her husband Sir Richard Wallace. During the formal opening of the Wallace Collection on the 22nd of June 1900, Lord Rosebery, Chairman of Trustees, described the Wallace Collection as, quote, "the greatest gift, I believe, that has ever been made by an individual to our country." Yet through much of the museum's history, little attention has focused on Lady Wallace. There are several reasons for this. She was not herself a collector of substance. We know nothing written in her own hand. Negative accounts of her by contemporaries published in the 20th century haven't served her well. And she was a Frenchwoman living in England, yet disinclined or unable to speak English, and shy by nature. Yet, in terms of social mobility, Lady Wallace's life story is remarkable for her time. Born in Paris to unmarried parents, a factotum and a linen maid, on the 15th of March, 1819, and named Julie Amélie Charlotte Castelnau, Lady Wallace died an immensely wealthy woman at Hertford House in London, her home for the last 25 years of her life, and now the home of the Wallace Collection. Her husband, the collector and philanthropist Sir Richard Wallace, had predeceased her in 1890. He left to her one of the greatest private art collections ever formed, about half of which comprises the Wallace Collection. The rest of the collection, together with her properties in Paris and the north of Ireland, she left to the Wallace's private secretary, John Murray Scott. The Wallace Collection is especially renowned for its 18th century French paintings, Sèvres porcelain, furniture and gold boxes, but also has superb holdings of Old Master paintings, European arms and armour, and medieval and Renaissance decorative arts. Here you see Sir Richard and Lady Wallace in 1871-2. Richard Wallace had been born illegitimately in London and brought up from the age of 7 in Paris by the third Marchioness of Hertford, who was separated from her husband, the third Marquis. She lived in the adjacent street to her oldest son, Richard Seymour Conway, who inherited the title of fourth Marquis of Hertford on the death of his father in 1842. He is the likely father of Richard Wallace, who came to act as his art agent. Although they didn't marry until February 1871, when they were both in their early 50s, Richard Wallace and Lady Julie Castelnau had known each other since at least 1839, when he was 21 and she 20. What do we know of Julie's life before their marriage? She and Richard have traditionally been described as having met when Julie was working as an assistant in a Parisian perfume shop, but a contemporary document indicates that she was perhaps additionally a dressmaker. In 1840, Julie gave birth to their son, who was baptized at the age of 8 with his mother's surname as Georges Henry Edmund Castelnau. Richard Wallace appears to have lived separately from his mistress and son during the boy's childhood. It would be 30 years before Richard and Julie married. What was the reason for this? It has been claimed that because the 4th Marquis of Hertford disapproved of Julie Castelnau, Richard and Julie were obliged to defer marrying until after Lord Hertford's death in 1870. Were this the case, though, it seems strange that photographs of Richard Wallace and Lord Hertford had equal prominence in the boudoir at Hertford House, a room closely associated with Lady Wallace, as this slide shows. So here you see a detail of the boudoir with a photograph of Richard Wallace on the left and a photograph of the 4th Marquis on the right. A further indication that Lord Hertford's disapproval may not have been the reason for their late marriage is provided by the occupancy records for 1 to 3 Rue Taitbout, a property owned by Lord Hertford and close to his own home. They show, as the arrows indicate, that Julie Castelnau was one of the tenants living in the property in the early 1860s. It is also Richard and Julie's address on their marriage certificate of February 1871. According to an account written shortly after Lady Wallace's death, Richard and Julie lived together for 20 years before their marriage. It seems that Julie didn't mix in Wallace's social circles before their marriage. She's not shown in any of these photographs of Richard Wallace and their son Georges, taken when Richard and Georges were staying with a friend in 1862-3. And at the top left, you see Richard Wallace and Georges, his son, playing dominoes, watched over by their host. And then here on the top right, Richard talking to Georges, who's mounted on a horse. And then bottom left, here we have father and son standing together with very similar poses. And then on the right here, Richard seated at the table with friends and Georges looking over his shoulder. And in fact, so Julie is absent from these photographs, and in fact, Wallace seems not to have been faithful to her. He's believed to have had other liaisons, including one with the Bohemian literary hostess, Apollonie Sabatier. The 4th Marquis of Hertford died on the 24th of August 1870 during the Franco-Prussian War, just as the Prussian army was approaching Paris to begin the siege of the city that culminated in a disastrous French defeat. Soon after Lord Hertford's death, Richard Wallace learnt to his surprise that he'd inherited the 4th Marquis's unentailed estate, including properties in Paris and his magnificent art collection. The situation in Paris during the siege was desperate, and Wallace immediately began to give major funds to help the destitute, as well as chairing the committee of the British Charitable Fund, which helped impoverished British citizens in France. And this photograph shows Wallace in the centre, chairing the committee of the British Charitable Fund in March 1871. The photograph on the left shows the Wallace's son Georges Castelnau in army uniform. In the midst of the hardship following the French defeat, on the 11th of February 1871, Wallace legally recognised his 30-year-old son. 4 days later, Julie and Richard married. There are indications that Julie may have attempted to put her background on a more socially acceptable footing. On their marriage certificate, you see a transcript of it on the right, her deceased parents are described as married, and she later said that her father had been a soldier. Both statements have yet to be confirmed. By 1880, she was using her second given name, Amelie, in place of Julie. I don't know whether this change has social status implications or was simply a personal preference. These images illustrate the extraordinary transformation that took place in Sir Richard Wallace's life in 1871-2, catapulting him to fame and celebrity. On the left, you see one of the many begging letters that required no more of an address to reach him than Paris. So this one that you see is addressed to Monsieur Richard Wallace, millionaire anglais, en ville, because it's written by somebody in Paris. And on the right, an engraving published in the Illustrated London News in December 1872, celebrating his philanthropy on both sides of the Channel. Although he'd lived in Paris from childhood, Wallace was a British citizen. In August 1871, Queen Victoria awarded his philanthropy with a baronetcy, and he and Julie became Sir Richard and Lady Wallace. For Lady Wallace, the adjustment required to adapt to the transformation of her life from one of obscurity to one of prominence as the wife of a renowned philanthropist, art connoisseur and collector must have been profound. Several months later, Sir Richard and Lady Wallace moved to England and made Hertford House in Manchester Square, London, their main residence. They maintained homes and major interests in Paris, where they still spent a good deal of their time. Their decision to make London their main residence was undoubtedly influenced by their experience of revolutions, war, and the Commune in France, in contrast to the greater political stability of Victorian Britain. This bust of Lady Wallace by Auguste Charles Le Bourg marks the transformation in Julie's life from obscurity to prominence. It was exhibited at the Paris Salon in 1872. Rarely, for a woman of her time, Lady Wallace's life spanned the social and cultural divide between her French working class origins and her privileged status in Britain. Perhaps this was a factor in her later decision to remain in England after her husband's death in 1890. By early 1872, the Wallaces had made the move to London, and as this caricature of Sir Richard, published in Vanity Fair in 1873 shows, he quickly became an establishment figure and a member of Parliament. He had large estates in Suffolk and the north of Ireland. Through philanthropic endeavours involving his collection, Wallace enhanced his status and popularity in British society. His most famous benefaction was his loan from 1872 until 1875 of more than 2,000 works of art for the opening exhibition at the Bethnal Green Museum in a deprived neighbourhood in East London. This print records the opening of the exhibition by the Prince of Wales on the 24th of June, 1872. During the run of the exhibition, Sir Richard extended Hertford House to accommodate his growing collection and his household. The Wallaces began receiving visitors in 1876. As the first page of their visitors' book on the right shows, from the outset, royal and aristocratic visitors came to Hertford House. The Wallaces were generous hosts, sometimes throwing large parties on summer afternoons that were attended by several hundred people. Invitations were issued in Lady Wallace's name. An impression of one such party is conveyed by this newspaper report from June 1883, and I quote, "Lady Wallace gave one of her delightful parties at Hertford House and threw open the galleries of the most magnificent house in London. The engineers played in the garden court and the Blue Hungarians in the great gallery. Lady Wallace evidently enjoyed music because she had a grand piano in her reception room, and a French polka was composed for her by Dabadi." Perhaps inevitably, Lady Wallace remained an outsider in British society. the circumstances of her son's birth and her reluctance to speak English being significant disadvantages. Contemporaries found her company awkward. Recalling a dinner in November 1872, when he was a guest at the Wallace's Suffolk estate, Sudbourne, the first Earl of Cranbourne wrote, quote, "Lady Wallace speaks only French, and I took her in, to my dismay, and stumbled through some very bad language." Ferdinand de Rothschild, who regarded Lady Wallace as plain in appearance and intellectually undistinguished, thought that she dragged her husband down to her social and intellectual level. He noted that although society was willing to accept Richard Wallace's hospitality and to shake hands with Lady Wallace under her own roof, people would not reciprocate to her. Baron Ferdinand considered Sir Richard and Lady Wallace an ill-suited couple, yet recognised that, as he said, the happiness of her home must have afforded him the happiness of his home, Richard Wallace's, must have afforded him ample compensation for the loss of social amenities that he experienced as a result of declining invitations that excluded his wife. But through the second half of the 20th and into the 21st century, it's been speculated that the Wallaces were an ill-assorted and unhappy couple, in part due to the publication of negative accounts of Lady Wallace. The situation hasn't been helped by a failure to recognise the evidence of their bedroom. Throughout the museum's history, it has been assumed that the only bedroom on the first floor of Hertford House in the far southwest corner, that's this room I'm indicating here with an arrow, that the only bedroom on the first floor of Hertford House in the far southwest corner was just used by Lady Wallace. The reason for this must be that in the 1890 inventory of the house, taken after Sir Richard's death, the room is described as Lady Wallace's bedroom. Yet this plan of the first floor of Hertford House, made soon after Lady Wallace's death in 1897, shows that the couple must have shared what is the only bedroom on this floor. And I've indicated the bedroom with a red arrow, both in the image of the whole of the first floor and in the image just of the front of the building on the first floor, where you see the private rooms of Sir Richard and Lady Wallace. And so you can see that the bedroom here is very close to both of their bathrooms and dressing rooms there. Other contemporary sources, previously unknown or overlooked, refer to this room as the state bedroom, showing that it was indeed the couple's bedroom. Baron Ferdinand's observation about the happiness of Wallace's home appears to be borne out by the contents of this room. Furnished with lightly coloured fabrics and delicate 18th century furniture, the bedroom was opulently hung with a treasure trove of essential 18th century paintings, including 4 mythological panels by Boucher, 2 of which you see here, and Fragonard's Risqué, The Swing. It appears to have been a veritable love nest. In May 1872, Sir Richard Wallace acquired the Sudbourne estate in Suffolk. Its seat was Sudbourne Hall, which you see on the left. The Wallaces hosted shooting parties there. On the right, you see them at the centre of one such party in 1883. The Sudbourne staff included 40 gardeners, 17 stablemen, and 23 gamekeepers. In 1879, the Prince of Wales, later Edward VII, was one of the party. He seemed enchanted by his 4-day visit, during which 4,000 head of game were killed. Lady Wallace assisted Sir Richard in his duties as Lord of the Manor, which he carried out assiduously and enthusiastically. On their first visit to the estate in September 1872, they provided and served a meal to 170 children of the poor at the National School in Orford. Lady Wallace undertook annual engagements on the estate, such as distributing gifts to children at the Sudbourne festival known as the Orford Christmas Tree. Lady Wallace supported Sir Richard's philanthropic endeavours with smaller scale acts of charity. The top three images here show in the centre All Saints Church in Sudbourne, flanked by gifts that she gave in the context of the Sudbourne estate, and they're both still in use today. So when in 1878-9, Sir Richard paid for the restoration of the church, Lady Wallace presented the Bible that you see on the right, and on the left you see the Wallace Cup. So this one here, the Wallace Cup, which she presented to the Orford Regatta in 1877. In Paris in the 1880s, Sir Richard chaired the committee for the building of St George's Anglican Church and contributed a significant amount of the funding for it. Lady Wallace gave the church a liturgical set in silver plate, and below at the bottom here, you see a detail of the base of the chalice that she gave to the church, inscribed to that effect. So you may be able to make out that it says presented by Lady Wallace. Lady Wallace also played her part on philanthropic committees related to Wallace's large estate in the north of Ireland. In 1876, Sir Richard lent pictures to the Industrial Exhibition and Bazaar held in Belfast to raise funds for the Belfast Working Men's Institute and Temperance Hall. The bazaar was organised under the patronage of the Duchess of Abercorn and Lady Wallace. Perhaps surprisingly, since Lady Wallace is not known to have been a collector in her own right, she lent to two exhibitions alongside her husband. The first of these was the Lone Museum of Art Treasures exhibition in Dublin in 1873. The second, represented here, was held in Paris in 1884 by the Union Centrale des Arts Décoratifs, of which Wallace had been a founding member. Lady Wallace's name as a lender is indicated here by the red arrows. So you see the front of the exhibition catalogue on the left, and then you see in the middle two images show manuscripts from the archives of the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, showing the addresses of lenders on the left with I've indicated Lady Wallace's name below that of Sir Richard. Then on the right in the middle, a list of her loans to the exhibition, and then on the far right, where it says you can see she's lent a bonheur du jour, a piece of furniture, and it says collection of Lady Wallace. And in fact, Lady Wallace lent to this exhibition Chinese and Japanese porcelain and 18th century French works of art, including Sèvres vases, this piece of furniture that you can see the catalogue entry for, and a painting by Boucher, La Musique, which were described as being, as I've said, from her collection specifically. The couple's comfortable relationship seems to be reflected in this photograph. Here, Lady Wallace is sitting alongside her husband, so you see Sir Richard and Lady Wallace here, and they're sitting in a very sort of easy and informal way with friends on the steps of the Château de Bagatelle, just in the Bois de Boulogne, just to the west of Paris. They used it as their summer residence. Ferdinand de Rothschild wrote derisively, but perhaps illuminatingly, that Lady Wallace preferred a drive in the Bois de Boulogne, cafe dinners, and the French theatre to conversing with clever and distinguished people. Here you see the Wallaces' granddaughter, Georgette, who they may never have met. From the mid-1870s, the Wallaces were oppressed by a burden of disappointment. Sir Richard's aspiration that his son might move to England and a new baronetcy might be created with remainder to his son was declined by Queen Victoria in 1875 on the grounds that granting a revision to an illegitimate son would set an ill-advised precedent. Soon afterwards, the Wallaces' relationship with their son broke down irretrievably, probably because he refused to settle in England in fulfilment of Sir Richard's British dynastic ambition. Instead, he lived in Paris, where he and his mistress, Amélie Suzanne Gall, had 4 children born between 1872 and 1878. The Wallaces seem not to have known their grandchildren. There were 3 boys and a girl. Sir Richard died in Paris in July 1890. According to a contemporary, the Wallaces were devoted to each other. Her husband's death was a terrible blow for Lady Wallace. In her official notification of his death, she emphasised his philanthropy, quoting St. Paul. So the card that she sent out to people letting them know that Sir Richard had died said, "These 3 remain, faith, hope and charity, but the greatest of these is charity." The following year, Lady Wallace again highlighted Sir Richard's benevolence by memorialising him in Lisbon Cathedral on his Irish estate, with a stained glass window shown on the right, depicting the Good Samaritan, with the inscription, "Go and do thou likewise." In 1892, she offered Ipswich Museum, she gave to Ipswich Museum, the bronze sculpture of a stag and hounds that you see on the left, which Sir Richard had planned to donate to Ipswich Museum. It was accepted and placed in the location Sir Richard had had in mind for it, outside the Victoria Library adjacent to the museum. Sadly, it was later deaccessioned and is now lost. After Sir Richard's death, Lady Wallace found herself responsible for a celebrated art collection in properties in London and Paris, an estate in Ireland, the Chateau of Bagatelle, and various tenanted properties in Paris, as well as the management of the Hertford British Hospital in Paris. She came to rely heavily on, I'm not sure that I said actually, that the Hertford British Hospital was founded by Sir Richard Wallace after the 4th Marquis of Hertford's death in memory of the 4th Marquis, and the building for it was completed in 1877. So Wallace had been really involved in its management, and Lady Wallace took over that responsibility. She came to rely heavily on Wallace's private secretary of many years, John Murray Scott, who you see on the right. She channeled her charitable activities and contributions to public life, such as exhibition loans, through Scott. She continued to support a number of her husband's philanthropic activities by, for example, honouring his annual contributions to the British Charitable Fund and expressing her views on aspects of the day-to-day running of the Hertford British Hospital, from issues such as drainage to whether the hospital might have a dog. Lady Wallace has been depicted in widowhood as being overwhelmingly dependent on Scott. But letters from Scott to the doctor in charge of the Hertford British Hospital, which were only fairly recently discovered, reveal a more authoritative figure, with firm ideas about the management of the hospital. Her authority is amusingly demonstrated in a letter Scott wrote to the doctor describing how a visit to Brighton had been postponed due to Lady Wallace having been ill, but, quote, "but she is moving about again, and I suppose the March bugle will soon sound now." Lady Wallace continued Sir Richard's initiative in lending to the Royal Academy's annual Old Master exhibitions. In total, she lent more than 40 paintings, the majority Dutch, including in 1892, Jan Steen's Celebrating the Birth that you see on the left, which had been acquired by Sir Richard. She also lent goldsmith's work, including the English steeple cup shown on the right, which Sir Richard had also acquired. In widowhood too, Lady Wallace lent works of art from her Paris residences to 2 exhibitions in Paris. The first was held in 1892 at the fashionable gallery owned by the picture dealer Georges Petit, who had been a tenant of Sir Richard's. It was mounted in aid of the Union des Ateliers de Femmes, or Union of Women's Workshops. The second exhibition in Paris that Lady Wallace lent to was Marie-Antoinette et son temps in 1894, to which Lady Wallace lent 18th century French sculpture and furniture. Lady Wallace maintained contact with some of the elite in British society whom she and Sir Richard had known. It was in this context that she gave away 2 paintings from the collection and acquired 1. As the result of a picture swap with Alfred de Rothschild, Isaac van Ostad's Travellers Outside an Inn left the collection, which gained in exchange the artist's A Winter Scene that you see here. In 1893, Lady Wallace parted with William Powell Frith's Anne Page, which you see here. She gave it as a wedding present to the Duke of York and Princess Mary of Teck, later George V and Queen Mary. They were the children, respectively, of the Prince and Princess of Wales and the Duke and Duchess of Teck. I mentioned earlier that the relationship between Sir Richard and Lady Wallace and their son broke down irretrievably in the mid-1870s. Tragically, their son predeceased them in 1887 at the age of 46. When Lady Wallace died at Hertford House of bronchitis and acute Bright's disease, aged 77, on the 16th of February 1897, she bequeathed to her grandchildren a large residential and commercial building that Sir Richard had built on the Boulevard des Italiens in Paris. This was the property that Sir Richard had indicated should be left to them. Although a substantial multi-tenanted building, it was a meagre offering given her enormous assets. What became of the Wallaces' grandchildren? Here you see their granddaughter, who you saw as a child earlier, their granddaughter Georgette, who became a celebrated opera singer in Paris under the stage name Lucy Arbel. Given her grandfather's wonderful art collection, it's amusing to see her on the right, posing as the Mona Lisa. The oldest grandson, Marie Richard, interestingly, they all have Richard. All the 3 sons have Richard in their names, as of course the 4th Marquis had been Richard and Wallace had been Richard. So the oldest grandson, Richard George Wallace, had a distinguished military career. And he was the only one of the grandchildren to go on and have descendants, and their line continues today. The second grandson, Richard Henri, was both wounded and honoured in the First World War, while Edmund Georges Richard, the youngest grandson, was killed in action in 1915. This is a transcript of the first page of Lady Wallace's will. Her bequest of the works of art on the ground and first floors of Hertford House to the British nation is indicated by the red arrow. Aside from the bequest to her grandchildren and a number of individual legacies and charitable donations, the very substantial remainder of her estate went to John Murray Scott, if you remember, the personal secretary of Sir Richard. Scott was devastated by the demise of the woman who Lord Esher described as, quote, a very refined, shy and excellent lady. In a letter to the doctor in charge of the Hertford British Hospital, Scott wrote a few days after Lady Wallace's demise, quote, only those who, like yourself, knew her intimately can gauge the extent of my sorrow for the life of one for whom I had the greatest affection. After a close friendship of 26 years, the wrench of separation has been terrible, and it will be a long time before I shall be able to reconcile myself to the change in my existence. Given her punctiliousness in continuing Sir Richard's charitable activities, it seems very likely that Lady Wallace was following Sir Richard's intention in leaving the Wallace collection to the nation. Contemporaries believed that Wallace had begun negotiations with the government, but illness had obliged him to put his plans on hold, and Sir Richard hadn't pursued his idea any further, but left the collection and its fate in his wife's hands. There is an alternative narrative concerning Lady Wallace's reason for bequeathing the collection to the nation, one that was published in the periodical Vanity Fair in 1909, that is, in Scott's lifetime and while he was a trustee of the Wallace collection. The author wrote of Scott and the Wallace collection, quote, It is no longer a secret that this collection was offered to him, that is Scott, by Lady Wallace, but at his suggestion was bequeathed by her to the English nation. This account of the bequest was perpetuated in the Wallace Collection's own publications until 1920. The bequest to the nation would certainly have been in Scott's interest. This is because a month before Lady Wallace made her will, the government introduced estate duty. As a residual legatee who was not related to the deceased, Scott would have been liable to a higher rate of tax than that required of a relative. Lady Wallace's bequest to the nation was exempt from tax, reducing the high rate that would otherwise have been payable by Scott on his inheritance. However, given the ways in which Lady Wallace continued and fulfilled Sir Richard's intentions and commitments in other areas after his death, it seems most likely that she was honouring his wishes in making her bequest to the nation. When the Wallace Collection opened to the public in June 1900, it added a new dimension to the dedicated individual or family museum. Perhaps unique at the time, in being bequeathed by a widow whose child had predeceased her, Lady Wallace's bequest was also remarkable in being a discreet museum gifted by a woman and having been given to the British nation by a foreigner of humble birth. In the early days of the Wallace Collection, no visitor could have failed to appreciate Lady Wallace's pivotal role in gifting the collection to the nation. As you see here, her marble bust by Le Bourg had pride of place on the half landing of the grand staircase, below an ornate stone cartouche commemorating her bequest, inscribed, "The Wallace Collection, bequeathed to the British nation by Amelie, widow of Sir Richard Wallace, Bart, KCB. Yet over the years, Lady Wallace's identity and her personal agency in bequeathing the collection to the nation have been notably understated. What are the reasons for this, and to what extent has the situation fluctuated in the almost 121 years since the museum's opening? In spite of this magnificent act of philanthropy, Lady Wallace has traditionally been regarded in a negative light. And as I've explained, negative accounts of her by her contemporaries, published in the 20th century, damaged the perception of her. Despite her crucial role in bequeathing the Wallace Collection to the nation, recognition of Lady Wallace as one of the museum's founders has fluctuated. Her bust by Le Bourg was displayed in a founder's room in the Wallace Collection in the earlier 20th century, so after it had been removed from the position that we see in the photograph here. And she's sometimes included among the founders in Wallace Collection publications. Yet this isn't always the case, as this rather begrudging acknowledgement of her role, published in successive editions of a guide to the Wallace Collection between 2010 and 2016, illustrates. It says, "Not an art collector herself, and therefore not one of the founders, Lady Wallace nevertheless bequeathed the collection to the British nation in 1897. Yet in bequeathing the Wallace Collection to the British nation, Lady Wallace's achievement went beyond gifting what the Prince of Wales described at the official opening of the museum as, quote, one of the finest collections in the world, a collection of which every civilized nation must envy us. At a key period in the growth of the women's movement, Lady Wallace's magnificent gift also helped to raise awareness of the major contribution that women could play in shaping the public sphere. As a woman, Lady Wallace was almost unprecedented in gifting a discreet museum to the public. Her example can be seen as a trailblazer for later female donors of dedicated museums, most notably Nelly Jacquemart's bequest to the Institut de France of the Musée Jacquemart-André, which opened in 1913, and Isabella Stewart Gardner's bequest of her eponymous museum in Boston, which opened in 1924. Both women visited Hertford House in Lady Wallace's lifetime. In making her bequest of the Wallace Collection to the nation, Lady Wallace focused national awareness on the major contribution that women could play in shaping the public sphere. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, for such a fantastic talk, such an interesting insight into, as you say, one of the characters of the Wallace collection who's fluctuated in their sort of our focus on the founders. I want to get straight into some questions, as we've had some come in already. And of course, if anybody does have any further questions for us, please do get those in either via the Q&A function if you're joining us on Zoom, or if you're watching on YouTube, please send those in via the chat function. We'll pass those on for you. But just to get us started, we have a question here from Debbie. Why did she leave so little to her grandchildren?
Well, it seems to be because of the breakdown of the relation, her and Sir Richard's relationship with their son, which seems to have been really essentially due to this family that he had in Paris, and that had prevented him from doing what Sir Richard had aspired to, which was coming over to Britain and carrying on the family dynasty here. So that seems to be the reason. Has to be said that in the past, for a long, long time, what was left to them has always been described as a house, sounding incredibly insignificant. In fact, it's a very substantial building on the Boulevard des Italiens with tenants, both commercial tenants and residential tenants. And the family still owns it today. Nevertheless, it was, compared with the extent of her estate, it was a very small part of it, but it's to do as far as we can tell, it's to do with the breakdown of their relationship, her relationship with the son, and the reason for that, of course, is partly the existence of these grandchildren.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And another one coming up here. What happened to the rest of the collection that was given to Scott?
Ah, yes. So that's very interesting. So some of the properties he in Paris he sold in the same year, I think, 1897. He the bagatelle in 1904 went to the city of Paris. He himself died in 1912, and then he was leaving there was a sale from his collection in 1913 because there was a dispute between his siblings and Lady Sackville of Knowle. He left a lot of his estate to Lady Sackville of Knowle, and it was contested by his siblings, and resulted in a sale in 1913, a very important sale. And then Lady Sackville did get a house that was had been divided into apartments, but a house at Two Rue Lafitte in Paris, and she in either 1916 or 1917 sold the contents of that flat to a dealer, and that's how quite a lot of the collection, of course, is now, for example, in American collections. It was then dispersed over the years.
Thank you very much. And we've got questions flying in, so I'm going to shoot on to the next one. This time coming in over the Zoom chat. How did the Wallace family originally make their money? I appreciate this might be quite a broad question for you.
Yes, so originally they had, going back to the 17th century, they had an estate in Ireland. They then, over the years, developed, owned an estate in Warwickshire. So as well as land, they also made fortuitous marriages. So this was certainly the case with the second Marquis, married very well. The third Marquis of Hertford, he eloped actually with the lady who became the third Marchioness of Hertford, who was the one who brought Richard Wallace up. But he landed on his feet because her paternity was disputed by two very wealthy men, the fourth Duke of Queensberry and George Selwyn, a sort of politician and wit at the time. And they both left her significant fortunes. So that brought in a lot of money. And then the estate in Ireland was one of the largest estates in Ireland, in the north of Ireland. And that brought in a significant amount of revenue. And then they actually had quite, they had substantial properties in Paris, almost all of them within a stone's throw, literally on one or other side of the Boulevard des Italiens. So the first member of the family to buy a property in Paris that we know of bought a property on the Boulevard des Italiens in 1816, and the final purchases were made in the 1870s by Richard Wallace. So in the interim, the third Marchioness of Hertford, the fourth Marquis of Hertford, and Richard Wallace were all buying properties in this fairly small area of Paris. And the fourth Marquis also bought one of the passages leading onto the Rue de Rivoli, which was full, of course, of rather luxurious commercial properties. So there was quite a spectrum of ways through which they acquired their wealth.
Certainly sounds like quite a broad range of different fingers in different pies, you might say.
Yes.
Slightly different question now. We have a question from Patricia Braithwaite, who's asked, who was Anne Page? If you could tell us a bit more about Anne Page.
I can't tell you much, but she's a character from The Merry Wives of Windsor. And it's a really long time since I've seen The Merry Wives of Windsor. So
we'll let you off on that one then.
But anyway, she is a character from the play.
Thank you very much. So a few more questions coming in here now. Why was the instruction in the will that different buildings should be used for the collection not observed? Who owns the building in which the Wallace collection is housed?
Oh, right, that's a great question. That's something I had to cut because I had to do a lot of cutting for this talk. The house, Hertford House, was leased by successive Marquises of Hertford. The lease was acquired from the Portman estate in the late 18th century by the second Marquis of Hertford. It formed part of the entail. So even though they didn't own the property, the lease was part of the Hertford entail. Excuse me. And so when the fourth Marquis died in 1870, the lease was acquired by his heir. Now, the fourth Marquis, I hope you gathered, he didn't marry and he didn't have a legitimate heir. So the entailed property went to a cousin who became the fifth Marquis of Hertford. So he got the lease of Hertford House. But because he'd missed out on so much else of the fourth Marquis's estate that went to Wallace, he had great financial worries. So late in 1871, he sold the remainder of his lease to Richard Wallace. So of course, Lady Wallace inherited the lease of the house. So Scott inherited the lease of the house from Lady Wallace. And of course, Lady Wallace had said that the collection had to be housed in a purpose-built building in central London. She hadn't mentioned it being in Hertford House, which obviously it seems that Richard Wallace definitely wanted it to be in Hertford House. But because of the lease, the government hadn't thought that was a good idea. So Wallace's negotiations with the government had finished. But Lady Wallace, so when Scott had the lease, he made an arrangement with the government that he would see if he could negotiate for them to have the freehold, which he was successful in doing. And a committee had been set up in 1897 to look at the possible locations of the collection. And so Hertford House had been taken into consideration. And once it had been agreed that the government could buy the freehold of the property, then it was decided that the best option for the collection was to be at Hertford House.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And we have another few questions about Lady Wallace and the collection. Before, I know we have a few questions come in about the bedroom, which we will get back to in a moment. But just while we're on Lady Wallace and the collection itself, we have a question here asking, are there letters and diaries documenting the life of Lady Wallace?
Well, there could well be, but really sadly, we don't know of them. But in fact, when we were working towards the celebration of the bicentenary of Wallace's birth in 2018, two lots of really important sources of documentary information were discovered. So who knows what else we might come upon in future years. But no, we don't have. I mean, we have these letters that were in fact discovered in the course of this research towards 2018, a lot of letters from Murray Scott and to him from the doctor at the Hertford British Hospital. They were discovered in Hampshire Record Office because this doctor who was in charge of the hospital was a son of Lord Carnarvon, and the Carnarvon papers are in the Hampshire Record Office. So new material does come up, and of course that gives us quite a lot of insight into Lady Wallace's widowhood from all Scott's letters about what she's saying about the hospital, and of course where they're sent from, and when he's with her. But no, we've not discovered yet, but hopefully sometime in the future.
Fingers crossed, certainly. Another question again to do with Lady Wallace and the collection, this time from Maria. And she's asked, during Richard's lifetime, did Lady Wallace have an involvement in the collection? I don't know if this is something maybe we'll need to discover a few more letters to find out about.
Well, it's very interesting that she did, under her own name, exhibit quite a few items. I think there are about 24 loans to that exhibition in his lifetime in 1883 in Paris. So and how much involvement she had, I don't know. She certainly went with him when he went to meet Henry Cole just in advance of the Bethnal Green Museum exhibition opening. I've read in newspaper reports that she was with him at the opening. So it does seem that, and as I said in the talk, she also lent something to an exhibition where he lent quite a few works of art in Ireland, or maybe I didn't mention that. So she was definitely alongside him. She does seem to have clearly did have some works of art of her own. Having said that, Ferdinand de Rothschild, in his memoir Bric-a-Brac, which was published in 2007 in an issue of Apollo magazine, he is incredibly rude about her lack of taste, but that seems to be countered by what she had in her boudoir and in their bedroom. I mean, that really seems to counter it, and he was incredibly snobbish about her.
Evidently, I think certainly a woman of great taste. And in fact, talking of the bedroom, as I mentioned, we have a few questions that have come in regarding that. So we have one here from Sophie North, who said, thank you for such a wonderful talk to start us off, but also, do we know from the inventories what other objects were held in the bedroom at Hertford House?
Yes, we do. Yes, so we have inventories. We have a number of inventories for Hertford House, but talking just about the time of which Sophie's referring to, the time of Richard Wallace and Lady Wallace, we have a very detailed inventory taken in 1890 when Sir Richard Wallace died, and then again in 1897 when Lady Wallace died. So yes, everything is very, very much specified. And in fact, I think I'm right in remembering that for the bedroom, all the Sèvres porcelain is listed together and all the paintings are listed together. So you get categories within a room within the inventory. And we also have inventories of what is to be included in the bequest and not specified by Lady Wallace, but after her time, and what isn't. So we've got very detailed inventories.
Fantastic. And as I said, we have another question here, looking at the bedroom, as it were. A question here asking, wasn't it normal for the main bedroom to be the ladies' territory and for the master of the household only to be invited in if she wished and otherwise be banished to the dressing room? Is that sort of normal practice?
I'm afraid I don't know about that, but I can tell you another thing I cut out because I was trying to cut down the length of time the talk was going to take. I can tell you that there was no bed in Sir Richard Wallace's dressing room, because initially I'd wondered if that could be the case. So the references in two sources to it being the state bedroom and the fact that there wasn't a bed in his dressing room suggests that they were certainly sharing the same room. And I have to say, I don't know what the tradition would have been in France. So I don't know whether they were following that in that respect.
Thank you very much. And just a few more questions now before we close out at 2 o'clock. So I have one that's come in here via YouTube, and they've asked, excuse me a moment, I was wondering how the collection was constituted. Were the works of art bought from dealers and or at auction?
Oh right, so it's a complete mixture actually. In Lord so when the fourth Marquis, well, the third Marquis, yes, he bought at auction. I don't know enough about of the detail about him to know whether he was also buying from dealers. Certainly he did buy at auction. For the fourth Marquis, he bought at auction, though he wasn't often present himself. And in fact, Richard Wallace's role in the 1840s, 1850s and 1860s, his major role was to be buying works of art on Lord Hertford's behalf at auction, but also from private collections. So Richard Wallace went in 1867 to Rush, St. Petersburg, to buy works of art from privately. And he was buying from auctions and also from private owners, not just dealers, but also from private collectors. So the nucleus, a huge nucleus of the medieval and Renaissance works of art in the Wallace collection, acquired by Richard Wallace in August 1871, was the Comte de Nieuwerkerk's collection. The Comte de Nieuwerkerk was the most important establishment art figure in the Second Empire and had a huge collection of 800 objects of his own, European arms and armour, medieval and Renaissance works of art. He then, with the fall of the Second Empire, he decided to live a life of exile in Lucca in Italy, and to finance that, he sold his whole collection en bloc to Richard Wallace. So that was a private purchase. So it's a whole mixture.
Thank you very much. A few more questions I think we can squeeze in just before the end of the talk today. We have a question here from Diane Hurst. Did Lady Wallace visit France while living in London and during her widowhood?
Yes, so she certainly lent works of art from her Paris properties. That's actually an important thing to say. The works of art that were lent to Parisian exhibitions came from the Paris properties. So they tend to be, with perhaps one exception, the works of art that were in the Paris properties and didn't come into the Wallace collection. Yes, she did go. She did visit. In fact, yes, we saw the photograph of her outside Bagatelle. Bagatelle was their summer residence, so they certainly spent time there. And Wallace spent quite a lot of time in Paris, particularly towards the very end of his life. She was certainly there with him, I think, a lot of that time. So yes, I think they were both going backwards and forwards fairly regularly, but clearly they were at Bagatelle usually in the summers.
So almost jet setters really before had the opportunity to do so. We have time just for one last question. So I've just chosen one here. Assuming that Lady Wallace was Catholic and Richard Wallace was Protestant, was that not also a reason for not getting married while older relations were alive? Did that have any impact on it, do you think?
I don't know whether she was Catholic. I don't think we know. Yeah, I mean, they got married in an Anglican, and they got married actually in the Mary. So, but they were very involved with the Anglican Church, both in Paris and, as we saw, in Sudbourne and in London, and they went regularly to I think it was St Thomas's, which was in Orchard Street, just off Manchester Square. It was demolished, sadly, but so I think it's unlikely that she was Catholic, but we certainly don't know if that is the case.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. That was fantastic. And as always, thank you to everyone for all those questions. We always have so many and so little time to cover them all. So thanks for running the gamut for us there to make sure we answered as many as we could. Of course, if anybody does have any further questions they'd like to ask, please make sure you can get those into learning@wallacecollection.org. And I'm sure I can pass those on to Suzanne if we can answer them, of course. And just to say, as always, a huge thank you to our BSL Live interpretation today, and also to yourself, Suzanne. And thank you to all of our audience for coming and listening and asking questions, as we wouldn't have much of a talks program without such a fantastic audience. If you do want to find out more about Lady Wallace and the history of the Wallace collection, of course, you can visit the Wallace Collection website, and there are links in the YouTube description below the stream to take you through to our website to tell you a little more. Also, Suzanne has just had a fantastic article published looking at Lady Wallace, which I will share the link for which now in the chat. But also to say, if you're interested in the history of the Wallace collection, Suzanne's book, of course, The Most Fortunate Man of His Day, Richard Wallace, connoisseur, collector and philanthropist, is currently available from the Wallace Collection website. So if you do have an interest, again, the link is in the description below the YouTube stream, and of course can be found on our website ordinarily. And any purchase of that nature does, of course, help the Wallace Collection a huge amount, particularly in these difficult times. So anybody who is of interest, please do pop online and take a little look. And having read it myself, I can say it's a truly fascinating read as well, and a really great insight into some of these characters who we so often forget about in the Wallace Collection. So thanks again to everybody for joining. And of course, if you are interested in more of our talks, we'll be having a second talk for International Women's Day this coming Wednesday, and that is looking at Marie Antoinette. So do join us for that talk this coming Wednesday. Again, details are on the website and will be up on YouTube shortly. So thank you very much and goodbye.